Now, before we totally disperse for the evening, can I share a little something short?
Yeah.
Do you mind? Stick around for another couple of minutes. So I just want to bring together some of the things we've heard. Tikva, in particular, was talking a lot about language and sensitizing us to language. And indeed, language is I think, under-described but very integral theme of both Purim and of Amalek in general. Minhag Yisrael dinhu. The customs of the Jewish people have the status of law. One of the most peculiar and yet long-lasting and strongest customs in many Jewish communities is to read, this coming Shabbat, read the Parsha of Amalek over and over again in many different ways, slightly pronouncing things a little different, either with Yemenite musical tropes, and then Polish, and then German, all the different ways to make sure we're getting it right. To say the word Timchet Zecher Amalek, and then saying it again, Timchet Zecher Amalek, in case there's a slight difference, Zecher, wipe out the memory of Amalek. Now this is bizarre, and indeed, most of the poskim, the rabbinical legal authorities, sort of roll their eyes and say, come on now. Zecher, that's just different accents, different places. It means the same thing. Wipe out the memory of Amalek. And yet, the custom proceeds. And Minhag Yisrael dinhu. What's going on? In theory, the idea behind this minhag is that if we say zecher, the lazy tzere, as many people, such as modern Ashkenazi Israelis, pronounce it today, instead of zeicher, that might imply a segol, the S sound, which might be a sort of unusual segolite form, not of the memory of Amalek, but of the masculinity of Amalek. Wipe out zecher, as in zichrut, as in zachar and nekeva, male and female of Amalek. Wipe out the males of Amalek. We might come to learn from that when we perform this mitzvah of genocide, that we do it only against the men, and we spare not only the king and the booty, as King Shaul did, but we spare all the women, and that what's going on is a hatred of masculinity, perhaps a way of playing out an inner drama of shame, of wiping out masculinity. And that minhag persists. Now, among the Rishonim, among the medieval authorities, the most prominent midrash that gets cited again and again and again among the medieval commentators is the idea that interpreting the verse of Kiyad al-Kesia, the hand of God will be ultimate, as we saw in the Exodus verses. That is a way of saying, without getting into the inside baseball of the Midrash, that it's not just that we've got a political problem as long as Amalek exists in the world and we haven't wiped out Amalek. We've got a theological and spiritual problem. God's name cannot be unified, says this Midrash, that became even just like an automatic, habitual Dvar Torah trope. The thing that rabbis would say in shul when they didn't have time to prepare. Just, as long as Amalek still exists, God's name isn't unified, God is still separated. It's another way of saying, Bayom Hahu Yedonai Echad Ushmo Echad. On that day, in the end of Aleinu, is from Zechariah. On that day, God's name will be one. Gemara and Psachim freaks out. What? Today, God's name isn't one? Yeah, we have evil in the world makes us separate and not be able to experience God as one. So it's from our perception, our experience. And indeed, that is the major trope of Amalek, that the existence of Amalek, whoever and whatever Amalek is, from all the things we heard tonight, prevents God's name from being unified. To such a degree that the Tur, based on a tradition from Rashi, even says that what we're doing dramatically, theatrically, every single time we say, Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbah in the Kaddish, one of the most well-known Jewish prayers, the part of the Kaddish in Aramaic for us all to understand it, The line of the Kaddish that everybody says, that many of the poskim say you should say full-throatedly. Some even clap for it. Some Rosh Hashivas of gangs in South Jerusalem shouted at the top of their lungs, Amen Yehi Shmei Ra. But what you're doing there, says the Torah, is you're unifying God's name. You're signaling that God's name will be unified. We're saying we recognize out of the depths of our pain of a divided world called by suffering and oppression, we believe and we remember toward the time when that will not be the case. Now, so there's language again. We're using our language to make things happen in the world. Who is Amalek and what did they do? There's a midrash right next to the one about plunging us into from our heat into the cold bath and cooling us off. There's another midrash which doesn't get cited a lot. There's a good reason for that because they're often kids in shul. There's an even better reason for that because they're grown-ups in shul, and grown-ups are embarrassed to talk about hard things. But we're not in shul, so we're going to talk about hard things. It says that, the Torah says that Amalek karcha baderech. And there's a lot of unclarity about the strange word karcha. It might mean it cooled you off, probably means happened upon you, pounced upon you, jumped you in the desert. But that root also has potentially sexual connotations. A seminal emission is a keri, for example, mikre laila, a nighttime incident. And so the Midrash says that asher karcha baderech, according to some Amoraim, is that Amalek came and timacha. They did sexually abusive things to you in the desert. We'll respect the euphemistic history as we take care of our language while making sure we understand the idea. That what Amalek did was an act of aggressive sexual humiliation. Vaizanev lecha, they tailed you. Now, what that presumably means, there was a cowardly sneak attack in the back, taking the weakest, slowest people in the group and killing them first, dividing the nation. They couldn't even meet us at the front. But it's not that, it doesn't say they cut you off, it says they tailed you. Tail. 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 That sounds like a crude language that the Midrash is using. Rabbi Yochanan says in the Midrash that what Amalek did would be they cut off the Israelite men's foreskins. Remember, in Sefer Yeshua, the Israelites did not circumcise themselves in the desert. They had to do it for everybody once they got there. But this Midrash says that Amalek did it for them, threw them up in the air at God, and said, "Hey God, is this what you want? Take what you've chosen." The humiliation of the people through sexual domination and violence, and the humiliation of their God by making a mitzvah of intense covenant seem like an act of barbarism and cheapness. And the act, forget about cooling their reputation off with the neighbors, it's of cooling them off with themselves, cooling off their God in front of them. Isn't that what always happens in sexual domination? Isn't that always happens through sexual oppression? Convincing people, telling them that they are not going to be able to experience intimacy. They're not going to be able to experience love. They are not loved existentially. That their source of intimacy is a source of pain, humiliation, and oppression. The Midrash goes on to explain that at that time, Israel did not yet know the secret of the branch. What kind of branch are we talking about? We're going to leave this for euphemism here. We'll try to make sure we understand Mativa shel Zmora, according to this Midrash. What is the nature of this branch? Later on in the book of Yechezkel, in the book of Ezekiel, when Ezekiel is fed up with the Jews for their wayward ways, for turning away from God, and for choosing wantonness, one of the crude, explicit things, a verse that we don't hear cited because we're in shul, and the shul is a place to act properly, and there are children in shul, and even more so, there are grown-ups in shul. What Yechezkel says they did, what Israel did, V'hinam sholchim et hazmora el apam. They shove their branch in my face. God, whose mouth, if it can be said, is a mouth of unending love and generosity, of the wellspring of Torah, of the kiss of life, of the breath of life. Into that orifice, if such a thing can be said, the people of Israel, or the men of Israel, have shoved their branch. That's how Ezekiel sums up in the 8th chapter what Israel have done in their disrespect to God. Kevan sheba Amalek, says the Midrash, limda lahem. Amalek came and showed them. Oh, you pathetic, pathetic, God-loving people. You pathetic people, you think that you came out of slavery, where you were oppressed, where you were sexually oppressed, and the men and the women were separated, and there was an attempt to show you what a real life of subjugation and emotional alienation is about. And you think that now you're going to be different? You think that now that you're free, you're going to demonstrate to the world what real liberation is, that liberation is a life of love and self-respect and divine respect? No, I'm going to teach you something else. I'm going to show you, by abusing you, and by abusing you, abusing your God, I'm going to show you how to do the same later. I'm going to abuse you so bad that you become that abuser. What we're doing when we dramatize wiping out Amalek, perhaps what we're really doing is we're saying, yes, timche et zecher Amalek. We're going to wipe out the memory of Amalek. And what is that memory? The zecher Amalek. We're going to wipe out the use of gender and the use of sex as a tool of sexual oppression and domination. We're going to wipe out the notion that sexual dominance and oppression is the way to move forward in the world. We're actually going to affirm the notion of our humanity and liberation, that liberation is love. That afhen hayu be'oto hanes, our men and our women were involved in this miracle together. That Moshe stood on the mountain praying with the merit of our mothers and of our fathers. And we're going to stand and we're going to demonstrate to the world that love and respect of body is a theological position. That is the real unification of God's name. Thanks everybody for coming to the Sermon Slam. Drink some more, tip your waitress. She's going to put the CD back on, move it to about track 6 or so, and have a great night. And donate to Kickstarter and check us out on YouTube.